The stranger rode into Thornfield at sundown, his horse half dead beneath him and desperation carved into every line of his weathered face. He was massive. 6'4" of mountain-bred muscle wrapped in elk hide and silence. His beard hung to his chest like a frozen waterfall, matted with trailed dust and something darker. Blood, maybe? Or mud. In this country, they looked the same by the time a man finished running. He stopped his horse in front of the saloon and sat there, swaying slightly, staring at nothing. Then he spoke. "I need a wife," he said. His voice cracked like he hadn't used it in months. "By tomorrow. Sundown." The few souls on the street stopped moving. A woman pulled her daughter close. Old Pete Matthews lowered his bottle and squinted through rheumy eyes. "You hear me?" The stranger's gaze swept across the gathering crowd like a scythe through wheat. "I'll pay. Whatever it takes. Land? Gold? Name your price." Someone laughed nervously. Someone else whispered a prayer. But one woman didn't move at all. Clara Henshaw stood on the porch of the general store, a basket of eggs balanced on her hip, watching this wild man with eyes that held neither fear nor curiosity. Just recognition. Like she'd been waiting for him. Like she knew exactly what desperation smelled like. She set down the basket, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked straight toward him, past the whispers, past the warnings, past every instinct that should have kept her safe. She stopped 3 feet from his horse and looked up at this stranger who'd ridden out of the mountains with madness in his eyes and a deadline on his soul. And she asked him one question. One single question that would change everything. What would you have done in her place? The question hung in the air between them like smoke from a gunshot. Why tomorrow? 3 words. That was all Clara Henshaw asked the stranger. Not, "Who are you?" or, "Where's the gold?" or even, "Are you insane?" Just that. Why tomorrow? The mountain man's jaw tightened. His horse shifted beneath him, sensing the tension coiling through its rider's body. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Clara watched the war play out behind his pale blue eyes, the desperate need to speak fighting against years of silence. "Because," he finally said, "if I don't have a wife by sundown tomorrow, they'll take my daughter." The whispers behind Clara intensified. She ignored them. "Who?" "The law." He spat the word like it was poison. "A judge in Helena. Says a man alone can't raise a child proper. Says she needs a mother or she goes to the state." Clara studied him. The dried blood on his knuckles. The way his hands trembled slightly on the reins. The haunted look of a man who'd ridden hard and fast with death snapping at his heels. "How old is your daughter?" 6. His voice broke on the number. "Her name is Lily. Her mother—" He stopped. Swallowed. "Her mother died birthing her. Been just the 2 of us ever since. Up in the mountains. Away from all this." He gestured vaguely at the town, at civilization, at everything he'd clearly tried to escape. "I don't need a real wife," he continued, the words tumbling out faster now. "Just someone who'll sign the paper. Stand before the judge. Make it official. After that, you can leave. Take the gold and go. I'll never bother you again. I just need— What's your name?" He blinked, thrown by the interruption. "Ezra. Ezra Holbrook. Ezra Holbrook." Clara tasted the name like she was testing fruit for ripeness. "I've heard that name before." The crowd murmured again. Old Pete stumbled forward, his bottle dangling forgotten from his fingers. "Holbrook?" Pete's voice carried the rasp of 40 years and 1,000 drinks. "The trapper? The one who killed them soldiers up near. I didn't kill anyone who didn't need killing." Ezra's voice dropped to a growl that silenced Pete mid-sentence. "And that's got nothing to do with this." But Clara had seen the flinch. The shadow that crossed his face at the mention of soldiers. There was a story there. A bloody one. The kind of story that made men flee to mountains and raise their daughters in isolation. The kind of story that eventually caught up to everyone. How much gold? Clara asked. Ezra reached into his saddlebag and produced a leather pouch. Heavy. The unmistakable weight of fortune. Everything I've got. 6 years of trapping. Should be enough to buy passage anywhere you want. Start a new life. Live comfortable for a long time. He held it out to her, and Clara saw his hand shake. Not from weakness. From fear. Pure, primal fear of losing the only thing in this world he loved. She should have taken the gold and walked away. Anyone with sense would have. Instead, she asked another question. Where is she now? Your daughter? Ezra's face crumpled for just a moment before he rebuilt its hard mask. Hidden. 3 hours' ride from here. In a place they'll never find. But the judge gave me until tomorrow sundown. If I don't appear with a wife and that little girl, he'll send men. Bounty hunters. They'll tear these mountains apart until they find her. And then? Then she disappears into some orphanage where I'll never see her again. His voice cracked like breaking ice. Please. I'm begging you. I don't beg. I've never begged for anything in my life. But I'm begging now. Help me save my daughter. Clara looked at this broken giant of a man. At the gold he offered. At the desperation that radiated from him like heat from a forge. Then she looked back at the town. At the general store where she'd worked for 3 years. At the boarding house where she'd slept in a cold room, alone, every night since her husband's death. At the life that had become a slow suffocation disguised as survival. She turned back to Ezra Holbrook. I don't want your gold. His face fell. But I'll marry you anyway. The crowd gasped. Ezra stared at her like she'd sprouted wings. I have conditions, Clara continued, her voice steady as stone. 1. I meet your daughter before any ceremony. 2. You tell me the truth about those soldiers. All of it. And 3. She stepped closer, close enough to smell the pine and sweat and desperation on him. You tell me why you really came here. To this town. To me. Ezra's eyes widened. I've never met you before in my, don't lie to me, Mr. Holbrook. Clara's voice dropped to barely a whisper. You rode past 4 towns to get here. I checked the trail dust on your horse. You came straight from the northern pass, which means you passed through Miller's Creek, Dusty Flats, and Camden before reaching Thornfield. She watched his face carefully. So I'll ask you one more time. Why this town? Why me? The silence stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Then Ezra Holbrook closed his eyes and said the words that changed everything. Because your husband told me to find you. Right before I watched him die. The world stopped spinning. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet, felt the blood drain from her face, felt something inside her chest crack open like ice breaking on a spring river. Thomas? The name came out strangled. My Thomas? Ezra nodded slowly, watching her with those pale eyes that had seen too much. Thomas Henshaw. He was alive until 3 weeks ago. Up in the mountains. With me. Clara's knees buckled. Strong hands caught her. Ezra had dismounted without her even noticing. He guided her to the porch steps, sat her down, crouched before her like a man gentling a wounded animal. They told me he was dead, Clara whispered. 2 years ago. They found his coat by the river. His horse came back without him. The sheriff said, the sheriff lied. The words hit her like a physical blow. Around them, the crowd had fallen completely silent, hanging on every word of this impossible revelation. Thomas didn't drown. Ezra's voice was low, meant only for her. He ran. Someone was after him. Someone powerful. He found me up in the high country, half frozen, barely alive. Begged me to hide him. So I did. Clara's mind raced. Thomas. Alive. All this time. While she'd mourned him. While she'd nearly starved. While she'd buried her heart in that cold grave and tried to pretend she could survive without him. Why didn't he come back? The question tore out of her throat. Why didn't he send word? I thought. She stopped, choking on tears she'd sworn she'd never shed again. I thought he was dead. He wanted to protect you. Ezra's voice carried the weight of painful truth. Whatever he'd gotten mixed up in, he knew they'd use you to get to him. Kill you, probably. Make it look like an accident. So he stayed away. Watched you from a distance when he could. Made sure you were safe. Watched me? Clara felt a fresh wave of shock crash through her. He was here? 3 times in 2 years. Always at night. Never close enough for anyone to see. He'd sit on that ridge above the town and watch your window until dawn. Ezra's jaw tightened. He loved you more than his own life. That's why he stayed away. Clara covered her face with her hands, trying to process the enormity of what she was hearing. Her husband hadn't abandoned her. Hadn't drowned. Had spent 2 years in exile, watching over her from the shadows, sacrificing everything to keep her safe. What happened to him? Her voice was muffled by her palms. You said he died 3 weeks ago. Ezra was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words carried the heaviness of guilt. They found him. The men who'd been hunting him. They tracked him to my cabin. He paused. There was a fight. Thomas killed 2 of them, but the 3rd got him in the gut. Bad wound. We both knew it was fatal. Clara lowered her hands. Her eyes were dry now. Dry and hard and burning with something far more dangerous than grief. Who were they? Soldiers. Or men dressed like soldiers. Thomas called them Mercer's dogs. The name hit Clara like a thunderclap. Colonel Abraham Mercer. The most powerful man in the territory. Owner of 3 silver mines, controller of the railroad expansion, unofficial king of everything between Helena and the Canadian border. And Thomas's former employer. He worked for Mercer, Clara said slowly. Before we married. Some kind of surveying job. He never talked about it much. Because he found something he shouldn't have. Ezra leaned closer, dropping his voice even further. Thomas discovered that Mercer's silver mines weren't just pulling ore out of the ground. They were using them as burial grounds. Dozens of bodies. Maybe hundreds. Men who'd crossed Mercer. Indians who'd refused to sell their land. Workers who'd demanded fair wages. Clara felt sick. Thomas knew about this? He documented everything. Drew maps. Made copies. He was going to take it to the federal marshals when Mercer found out. Ezra's face darkened with old anger. They came for him at night. Burned his office. Would have killed you too if Thomas hadn't run when he did. The pieces were falling into place now. The strange men who'd come asking questions after Thomas's disappearance. The fire at the land office that had destroyed all the records. Sheriff Morrison's sudden retirement and move to California. It had all been Mercer. Covering his tracks. Burying his secrets. And burying Thomas along with them. Where are the documents now? Clara asked. Hidden. Thomas gave them to me before he died. Told me to find you. Told me you'd know what to do with them. Ezra paused. He also made me promise something else. What? To take care of you. To make sure Mercer never got close to you again. His jaw set with determination. That's why I need the marriage. It's not just about Lily and the judge. It's about protection. Mercer's got men everywhere. But if you're my wife, if you're up in those mountains with me, he'll never find you. Clara stood slowly. Her legs were steadier now. The shock was fading, replaced by something colder and more focused. You said Mercer sent men after you. After Thomas. 3 of them. I killed them. That's what old Pete was talking about. They were wearing army uniforms, but they weren't real soldiers. Just Mercer's hired guns playing dress-up. And Mercer knows you killed them? By now? Probably. Which means he knows Thomas talked. Which means he knows someone out there has the evidence to destroy him. Ezra's eyes met hers with grim honesty. I wasn't just running from the law when I rode into town. I was running from Mercer's men. There may be a day behind me. Probably less. Clara processed this information with a strange calm. Her husband was truly dead now. The man who'd killed him was one of the most powerful figures in the territory. And the only evidence of his crimes was hidden somewhere in the mountains, guarded by a wanted man with a 6-year-old daughter. The judge and Helena, she said slowly. The one threatening to take Lily. Is he one of Mercer's people? Ezra nodded grimly. Judge Harold Crane. Mercer's puppet. He found out about Lily somehow. Decided the best way to flush me out was to threaten the only thing I care about. Clara understood now. It wasn't really about whether a single father could raise a child. It was about leverage. Control. Mercer wanted those documents, and he was willing to use an innocent little girl to get them. She felt something shift inside her. Something that had been dormant for 2 years, smothered beneath grief and survival. Rage. Marry me, she said to Ezra Holbrook. He blinked. I'm agreeing to your proposal, Clara clarified. But not just to satisfy some corrupt judge. And not just to save your daughter, though we will save her. Her voice hardened to steel. We're going to do what Thomas couldn't. We're going to burn Abraham Mercer to the ground. Ezra stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. You understand what you're saying? Mercer has an army. Judges. Politicians. We'd be going against. I understand perfectly. Clara's eyes burned with cold fire. Now take me to my husband's evidence. And then take me to your daughter. She paused. We have a wedding to plan. They rode through the night. Clara had never been this deep into the mountains before. The trails narrowed until they were barely visible, winding between massive pines that blocked out the stars. The air grew thinner and colder, and each breath felt like drinking ice water. Ezra led the way in silence, his body swaying with his horse's movements like they were one creature. Clara followed close behind on a mare she'd bought from the livery with the last of her savings. Everything else she'd left behind, the boarding house room, the job at the general store, the careful little life she'd built from the ashes of her grief. None of it mattered now. Around midnight they stopped to rest the horses near a frozen stream. Ezra built a small fire while Clara sat on a fallen log, staring into the flames and trying to organize her thoughts. Tell me about Lily, she said finally. Ezra looked up from the fire, surprise flickering across his weathered features. Most people asked about the gold first. Or the danger. Or how they were going to survive this impossible situation. She's brave, he said after a moment. Braver than me. When her mother died. He trailed off, poking at the embers. I was broken. Couldn't function. Could barely hunt enough to feed myself. But this tiny creature needed me. Depended on me. So I got up every morning and kept going. His voice softened with memory. She was walking by 10 months. Talking by 18. Full sentences. Like she'd been storing up words her whole life and finally decided to use them. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She names everything. The trees. The animals. The stars. She's mapped out her own constellation system. Made up stories about each one. Clara felt something warm penetrate the cold armor she'd built around her heart. She sounds special. She's everything. The words came out raw and honest. When her mother died, I thought my life was over. But Lily, she showed me that life wasn't about survival. It was about protection. Nurturing. Making something good grow in a world full of death. He looked up at Clara, his eyes reflecting the firelight. That's why I can't lose her. That's why I rode through 4 towns looking for you. Because Thomas told me you were the only person in the world who could understand. Who could help. Why me? Because you lost something too. Ezra's voice was gentle but direct. Thomas said you'd been fighting your own war? A quiet one. The kind most people never see. Clara felt exposed suddenly. Vulnerable. Like this stranger had reached inside her chest and touched something she'd kept hidden for years. My husband was my whole world, she admitted. When I thought he died, I wanted to die too. But I was too stubborn. Too angry. So I kept breathing out of spite. She laughed bitterly. That's not strength. That's just stubbornness. Sometimes they're the same thing. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the fire burn down to coals. When the horses were rested, they mounted up and continued deeper into the mountains. Dawn was painting the peaks gold when they finally reached the hidden valley. Clara's breath caught in her throat. It was beautiful. Heartbreakingly beautiful. A perfect oval of green meadow surrounded by towering cliffs, with a crystal stream running through its center. A small cabin sat near the northern edge, smoke curling from its stone chimney. Beyond it, she could see a garden, a chicken coop, and what looked like a small schoolhouse. She built that herself, Ezra said, following Clara's gaze to the miniature building. Said she needed a proper place for lessons. I helped with the heavy lifting, but the design was all hers. As they descended into the valley, a small figure emerged from the cabin door. Lily Holbrook was not what Clara had expected. She'd imagined a wild child, unkempt, skittish, feral from years of isolation. Instead, she saw a poised little girl with her father's pale eyes and her mother's auburn hair, wearing a handmade dress and watching their approach with calm curiosity. Papa! The girl's composure broke into a wide smile as she ran toward them. You came back! I knew you would. Ezra dismounted and swept his daughter into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. Clara watched the reunion with an ache in her heart, the profound, desperate love of a father who'd traveled through hell to return to his child. Lily! Ezra's voice was thick with emotion. This is Clara. She's going to help us. Lily turned those disconcerting pale eyes toward Clara. For a long moment, she simply stared, assessing this stranger who'd invaded her hidden world. Then she asked a question that made Clara's blood run cold. Are you the one Papa's been dreaming about? Ezra stiffened. Lily, you talk in your sleep, Papa. You've been saying her name for weeks. The girl looked back at Clara with unsettling directness. You say Clara will know what to do. Clara will save us all. Clara's throat tightened. She slid from her horse and knelt to bring herself eye level with this strange, perceptive child. Your father says you're very brave, Clara said carefully. Is that true? Lily considered the question seriously. I try to be. Mama told Papa before she died that I would need to be brave because he would need protecting. She glanced at her father with a wisdom far beyond her years. He doesn't know I heard. But I did. Clara felt tears threatening again. This impossible child, raised in isolation, carrying the weight of her dying mother's words like a sacred burden. I'm going to try to protect you both, Clara said. Would that be okay? Lily studied her face for several long seconds. Then she reached out and took Clara's hand in her small, strong fingers. Thomas said you would come. The world stopped. What did you say? Clara's voice came out strangled. The man who used to visit Papa. Thomas. He told me about you. He said you were the bravest woman he'd ever known and that someday you'd come to help us fight the bad man. Lily's grip tightened. He showed me your picture. The one Papa keeps in his pocket. Clara turned to Ezra, her heart hammering. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small, weathered photograph. Clara's own face stared back at her, younger, happier, standing next to Thomas on their wedding day. He gave it to me, Ezra said quietly. Told me to look at it whenever I felt like giving up. Said your face would remind me what we were fighting for. Clara took the photograph with trembling hands. Thomas's smile beamed up at her from across the years, from beyond death itself. He'd never forgotten her. Even in hiding. Even in danger. Even at the end. Where are the documents? She asked, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. The evidence against Mercer? Ezra pointed toward the cliff face behind the cabin. There's a cave up there. Hidden entrance. Thomas and I spent 3 months organizing everything, making copies, sealing them against the weather. And it's all still there? Every last piece of it. Enough to hang Mercer 10 times over. Clara wiped her eyes and looked at the father and daughter standing before her. This broken family that had somehow become tangled in her dead husband's final mission. Then we don't have time to waste. She straightened her spine and felt something new flowing through her. Purpose, direction, fire. Show me everything. And then we need to plan. Plan for what? Lily asked. Clara looked at the child who'd inherited her father's eyes and her mother's wisdom. For war, little one. We're going to bring a very bad man to justice. And we're going to do it together. Lily's smile could have lit the valley. Good, she said. I've been waiting for something exciting to happen. They had less time than Clara hoped. By nightfall, Ezra had shown her the cave and its contents. Thomas had been thorough, devastatingly, beautifully thorough. Ledgers documenting bribes to territorial officials. Maps marking the locations of mass graves near Mercer's mines. Sworn statements from workers who'd witnessed murders. Letters between Mercer and corrupt army officers arranging for troublesome Indians to disappear. The evidence was damning. Overwhelming. The kind of proof that could topple empires and send powerful men to the gallows. But getting it to the right people, that was the problem. The federal marshal in Helena is Crane's cousin, Clara said, spreading maps across the cabin's worn table. The territorial governor owes Mercer money. The army commanders have been taking bribes for years. So we go above them. Ezra stood by the window, watching the tree lean for movement. Washington. We get this evidence to Washington. That's a 3-week journey minimum. We don't have 3 weeks. Then what do you suggest? Clara stared at the documents before her, thinking of Thomas. Of his brilliant, methodical mind. Of how he'd always been 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Then it hit her. The newspaper. Ezra turned. What? The Helena Gazette. Their editor, Marcus Webb, he's been trying to expose Mercer for years. He's the only journalist in the territory who isn't bought and paid for. Clara's mind raced with possibilities. If we can get him this evidence, he'll print it. Every newspaper in the country will pick up the story. Mercer won't be able to silence it. Webb's newspaper is in Helena. Crane's territory. Exactly. Clara smiled grimly. We'd be walking into the lion's den. But if we time it right. A sharp whistle cut through the night air. Clara's blood froze. It was a bird call. But wrong. Too late in the season for that particular bird. That's Lily's warning signal. Ezra grabbed his rifle from the wall. We taught her to use it if anyone approached the valley. They found Lily crouched behind the schoolhouse, her small form barely visible in the moonlight. She pointed toward the eastern ridge. Men, she whispered. 6 of them. Horses. They stopped at the overlook. Clara's heart hammered. How long ago? Just now. They're still there. Looking down at the cabin. Ezra's face was stone. Mercer's scouts. They found us. How? Clara demanded. You said this valley was hidden? That no one knew about it. Someone talked. Ezra's voice carried cold fury. Someone in Thornfield. After I left, they must have. It doesn't matter how. What matters is what we do now. Clara's mind worked frantically. 6 men on the ridge. More coming, certainly. They had maybe an hour before Mercer's full force arrived. The evidence, she said suddenly. We need to get it out tonight. Before they surround us completely. There's only one trail out of this valley. They'll be watching it. Then we don't use the trail. Ezra stared at her like she'd lost her mind. The cliffs are 200 feet straight up. Nobody climbs them. Not even the mountain goats. Not up. Clara grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the cabin. Down. The stream, where does it go? Underground. There's a cavern system below the valley. The stream drains into it about a quarter-mile north. And where does it come out? Ezra's eyes widened with sudden understanding. Cedar Springs. About 4 miles west of here. Can Lily make the journey? She's explored those caves since she could walk. She knows them better than I do. Clara's plan crystallized. Then here's what we do. Lily takes the evidence through the caves. You and I stay here and hold off Mercer's men. Give her time to reach Cedar Springs. Hold off 6 men? With more coming? We don't need to win. We just need to delay them. Clara met his eyes with fierce determination. Long enough for your daughter to escape. Long enough for this evidence to see daylight. Ezra was silent for a long moment. Then he knelt beside his daughter, taking her small hands in his massive ones. Lily, can you do this? Can you take something important through the caves and keep it safe? The girl looked between her father and Clara. In her pale eyes, Clara saw no fear. Only resolve. Will you be okay, Papa? I'll be right behind you. I promise. Lily considered this. Then she nodded once, decisively. I can do it. The next 20 minutes were a blur of preparation. Clara helped waterproof the most crucial documents, while Ezra gathered weapons and ammunition. Lily changed into darker clothes and packed a small bag with supplies. When everything was ready, they stood together at the entrance to the cave system. Cedar Springs, Clara told Lily firmly. Find the stagecoach station. There's a man named Hank who runs it. He was a friend of your father's. He'll help you get to Helena. And then what? Find Marcus Webb at the Helena Gazette. Give him everything. Tell him Thomas Henshaw sent you. Clara paused, fighting the emotion in her voice. Tell him the truth is finally coming out. Lily looked at Clara with those ancient eyes. You're not coming with me, are you? Your father and I need to make sure no one follows you. But you might. The girl stopped. Swallowed. You might not. Clara knelt and pulled Lily into a fierce embrace. This child she'd known for less than a day. This strange, brave, impossible girl. Listen to me, Clara whispered. Whatever happens tonight, you survive. You get that evidence to Webb. You finish what Thomas started. Can you do that? Lily nodded against her shoulder. I can do anything. Clara released her and stepped back. Ezra said goodbye next, a long, desperate hug between father and daughter that made Clara's heart ache. Then Lily Holbrook disappeared into the darkness of the cave, carrying the hopes of the dead and the dreams of the living on her small shoulders. Clara and Ezra watched until they could no longer see her light. She'll make it, Clara said. She's stronger than both of us combined. I know. Ezra's voice was rough. That's what terrifies me. They returned to the cabin and prepared for battle. Clara took position at the east window with Ezra's spare rifle. He guarded the west approach. Between them, they had enough ammunition for maybe an hour of sustained fighting. It would have to be enough. The first riders came down the trail at midnight. Clara sighted along her rifle barrel, watching them approach in the moonlight. 6 men, just as Lily had said. They rode in tight formation, professional and confident. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Wait for my signal, Ezra murmured from across the cabin. The riders reached the meadow. One of them pointed toward the cabin. Another laughed, a cold, predatory sound that carried clearly in the mountain air. They dismounted 50 yards out. Ezra's rifle cracked like thunder. The lead rider dropped. And then hell broke loose. Bullets tore through the cabin walls like angry wasps. Clara pressed herself flat against the floor, feeling splinters rain down on her back as Mercer's men poured fire into the small building. The noise was deafening, rifle shots, screaming horses, men shouting orders in the chaos. Stay down! Ezra roared from his position. Clara crawled toward the east window, keeping below the line of fire. Through the shattered glass, she could see 4 figures spread out across the meadow, using rocks and fallen logs for cover. 1 down. 5 to go. She raised her rifle and fired at a muzzle flash. A cry of pain told her the shot had found its mark. 2 down! She shouted. Ezra's rifle boomed again. 3! The remaining men fell back toward the tree-line, regrouping. The shooting stopped momentarily, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the groans of the wounded. "They're waiting for reinforcements," Ezra said, reloading with practiced efficiency. "Probably sent a rider back when the shooting started." "How long until more arrive?" "An hour. Maybe less." Clara checked her ammunition. 18 rounds left. Ezra had maybe twice that. It wasn't enough for a prolonged siege. But it didn't need to be. Every minute they held out was another minute Lily moved closer to safety. "Clara." Ezra's voice was strangely calm. "If we don't make it out of this, we'll make it. But if we don't..." He met her eyes across the darkened cabin. "I need you to know something. Thomas was right about you. You are the bravest person I've ever met." Before Clara could respond, a new sound reached her ears. Hoofbeats. Many of them. Coming fast from the northern trail. "They're here," she breathed. But as the riders broke from the tree-line, Clara realized something was wrong. They weren't attacking the cabin. They were attacking Mercer's men. Gunfire erupted in the meadow as 2 groups clashed. Clara watched in stunned confusion as the newcomers, 8 or 9 of them, systematically cut down the remaining scouts. "Who?" she started. "I don't know." Ezra's rifle was trained on the chaos outside. "But don't let your guard down. Could be a trick." The fighting lasted less than 2 minutes. When it ended, only the newcomers remained standing. One of them, a tall figure on a black horse, rode toward the cabin with his hands raised. "Holbrook!" The voice was deep and commanding. "You can come out. We're not here for you." Ezra's eyes narrowed. "That voice. I know that voice." He moved to the door and opened it a crack. Clara watched his face cycle through confusion, recognition, and finally shock. "Marshal?" he said incredulously. The rider removed his hat, revealing a weathered face with steel-gray hair and a star pinned to his coat. "Deputy United States Marshal Franklin Hayes," the man announced. "And you, Mr. Holbrook, are a very difficult man to find." Clara joined Ezra at the door, her rifle still ready. "How did you know we were here?" The marshal looked at her with something that might have been respect. "Mrs. Henshaw, your husband spoke highly of you." Clara felt her heart stutter. "You knew Thomas?" "I was his contact in Washington. He'd been feeding me information about Mercer for over a year before he went underground." Hayes dismounted and approached the cabin slowly. "When I heard he was dead, I mobilized every resource I had to find his evidence." "And us?" Ezra asked suspiciously. "You were the trail to the evidence. I've had men tracking you since you left the mountains." Hayes's expression was grim. "Unfortunately, Mercer's people were tracking you too. We arrived just in time." Clara's mind raced. If this man was telling the truth, if Thomas had been working with federal authorities all along. "My daughter," Ezra said suddenly. "She's in the caves. Heading for Cedar Springs with, we know." Hayes held up a hand. "I've already dispatched men to intercept her. Protective custody. She'll be safe." "How do we know we can trust you?" The marshal reached into his coat and produced a small envelope. He handed it to Ezra. "Your friend Thomas gave me that. Said to show it to you if you ever doubted my intentions." Ezra opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single photograph, Lily as a toddler, sitting on Thomas's lap, both of them smiling at the camera. "He took that the first time he visited the valley," Ezra said softly. "I didn't even know it existed. Thomas trusted me with his mission and with that photograph. 2 of the most precious things he possessed." Hayes's voice carried the weight of sincerity. He asked me to protect his evidence, his friends, and the woman he loved. I intend to honor that request. Clara felt something break inside her. Something that had been clenched tight for 2 years. The evidence, she managed. It's in the caves. With Lily. Then we'll retrieve it together. Hayes gestured toward his men. We have a long ride ahead, and I have a feeling Colonel Mercer is about to have a very bad morning. The ride to Cedar Springs took 3 hours. By the time they arrived, the first rays of dawn were painting the eastern sky gold and pink. Lily was waiting for them at the stagecoach station, surrounded by Hayes's men. The evidence sat in waterproof pouches at her feet. When she saw her father, she ran to him with a cry of pure joy. Ezra swept her up and held her tight, tears streaming down his weathered face. Clara watched them reunite, and felt something stir in her chest. Hope. Actual hope. Something she thought dead and buried alongside her grief. Mrs. Henshaw. Hayes appeared beside her. There's something else you should know. What? The wedding. The one Holbrook needed to satisfy Judge Crane. The marshal's eyes crinkled with something almost like amusement. It won't be necessary now. With Crane and Mercer about to face federal charges, their custody claim becomes void. Clara absorbed this information. The wedding that had started everything. The desperate proposal that had brought her into Ezra's orbit. It was no longer necessary. She looked at Ezra, still holding his daughter, still crying silent tears of relief. And she realized something unexpected. She didn't want to walk away. Marshal Hayes, she said slowly. Is there a preacher in Cedar Springs? 3 days later, Abraham Mercer stood in the center of Helena's main square. Surrounded by federal marshals and a crowd that had grown to over 500 people. Clara watched from the courthouse steps as they read the charges. Murder. Conspiracy. Corruption. Fraud. The list went on for nearly 20 minutes. Mercer's face had gone gray. His expensive suit looked rumpled. His eyes darted constantly through the crowd, searching for someone who would help him. No one did. The Helena Gazette had published everything. Thomas's evidence. The maps. The testimonies. The photographs of mass graves that Mercer's own workers had dug. The story had been picked up by newspapers across the country within hours. Colonel Abraham Mercer was finished. But that wasn't what held Clara's attention. She was watching Judge Harold Crane, standing in chains beside his former master. The man who had threatened to take Lily away. The man who had conspired to use a child as leverage against her father. Clara walked down the steps and stopped directly in front of him. Do you remember me, Your Honor? Crane's piggy eyes widened with recognition and fear. I never met you. I had nothing to do with. You signed an order to take a 6-year-old girl from her father. You would have sent her to an institution. Left her alone in the world. All because your master told you to. Clara leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. She's standing right behind me. She wanted you to know something. Crane's gaze flickered over Clara's shoulder. Lily Holbrook stood on the courthouse steps, holding her father's hand. She wasn't crying. She wasn't cowering. She was watching Judge Crane with those pale, ancient eyes. And she was smiling. She says thank you, Clara continued. Because you made her father come find me. And now she has a mother. Clara turned and walked back to her family. Because that's what they were now. A family. The wedding had been small. A preacher in Cedar Springs. Marshal Hayes as a witness. Lily as the flower girl, scattering actual wildflowers she'd picked herself. No gold had changed hands. No contracts had been signed. Just 3 people who'd found each other in the chaos and decided to stay. Is it over? Lily asked as Clara rejoined them. Clara looked back at Mercer and Crane, at the crowd that was already dispersing, at the newspaper boys hawking the special edition. The trial will take months, she admitted. And there will be others. People who worked for Mercer. People who covered up his crimes. It's going to be a long process. But we won? Clara thought about Thomas. About his sacrifice. About the years he'd spent building this case, the years he'd spent watching over her from a distance, the love that had endured beyond death itself. Yes, she said softly. We won. Ezra squeezed her hand. Hayes wants us to testify. Both of us. It could take weeks. I know. We could stay in Helena. Rent a place. Let Lily experience civilization for a while. Lily made a face. Do I have to? I like the mountains better. You need to learn to read properly, Clara said firmly. And arithmetic. And history. Your schoolhouse was a good start, but there's more to learn. Will you teach me? Clara looked at this impossible child. This daughter she'd gained without giving birth. This fierce, strange, wonderful girl who'd carried the fate of hundreds on her small shoulders. I'll teach you everything I know, Clara promised. And then I'll find people who can teach you what I don't. Lily considered this seriously. Then she nodded. Acceptable. Ezra laughed, a real laugh, full of joy and relief. Clara realized she'd never heard him laugh before. It transformed his face, made him look younger, lighter. Come on, he said. Hayes promised us dinner at the hotel. Apparently, heroes eat free. They walked away from the courthouse together. Father, mother, daughter. A family forged in fire and desperation, held together by love and courage and the legacy of a man who'd given everything to protect the people he cherished. Clara paused at the edge of the square and looked back one final time. Thomas's photograph was still in her pocket. She could feel it against her heart with every step. She pulled it out and looked at her husband's smiling face. We did it, she whispered. We finished what you started. The morning wind stirred the photograph slightly, almost like a response. Clara tucked it away again and turned to face the future. 6 months later, Clara Holbrook stood on the porch of their new cabin, watching the sun set over the mountain valley that had become her home. The trial was over. Mercer would hang in the spring. Crane had been sent to federal prison. 24 other conspirators had been convicted of lesser charges. Thomas Hench's name had been cleared posthumously. A memorial had been erected in Helena with his picture on it. The man who'd sacrificed everything to expose the truth was finally being recognized as a hero. But Clara didn't need memorials to remember him. She carried his memory in her heart every day. In the way she taught Lily to read. In the stories she told about the brave surveyor who'd fought against evil. In the love she'd found with the mountain man her husband had chosen to protect her. Ezra came out of the cabin and stood beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Lily's asleep, he said quietly. Wore herself out exploring that new cave system she found. That girl has more energy than both of us combined. She gets it from her mother. Clara looked up at him sharply. Her mother? Ezra's pale eyes were soft in the fading light. You are her mother now. In every way that matters. She loves you. I love you. We're a family. Clara felt her throat tighten. A year ago, she'd been living alone in a boarding house, mourning a husband she thought was dead, going through the motions of survival without ever really living. Now she had a daughter who called her Mama. A husband who looked at her like she'd hung the moon. A purpose that extended beyond her own small existence. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Coming down from the mountains? Getting tangled up in all this? Ezra was quiet for a long moment. I regret that Thomas died. I regret that Lily had to see so much ugliness at such a young age. I regret a lot of things. He turned her to face him. But I will never regret finding you. Not for a single second. Clara rose on her toes and kissed him gently. I have something to tell you, she said when they parted. What? She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. And she watched his face as understanding dawned. Clara? Are you, the doctor in Helena confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to wait until we were home to tell you. Ezra's eyes filled with tears. This massive, scarred mountain man who had killed enemies and survived impossible odds was weeping at the thought of new life. A baby, he breathed. We're going to have a baby. Lily's going to be a big sister. I hope she's ready. She'll be the best big sister in the history of sisters. Ezra laughed through his tears. She'll probably try to teach the baby to climb mountains before it can walk. Clara leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his body against hers, listening to the wind whisper through the pines. She thought about Thomas, wherever he was now. She hoped he could see this. Hoped he knew that his sacrifice had meant something. That the people he'd loved had found their way through the darkness to something beautiful. Thank you, she whispered into the evening air. Ezra looked at her. What was that? Nothing. Clara smiled. Just talking to an old friend. The sun slipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Stars began to emerge, one by one, in the darkening dome overhead. Somewhere inside the cabin, Lily stirred and called out for her parents. Clara took Ezra's hand and led him toward the door. Toward their daughter. Toward the life they built from ashes and hope. Behind them, the last light of day faded from the western sky. But for the Holbrook family, a new dawn was just beginning. Some people spend their whole lives searching for love. For purpose. For a place where they truly belong. Others have it delivered by a desperate stranger on a dying horse, offering gold for a marriage that was never really about gold at all. Clara Henshaw set out to honor her husband's memory. She ended up finding a new life, a new family, and a love she never expected. But maybe that was Thomas's plan all along. Maybe some stories don't really end. They just change hands. From one heart to the next. Forever. The end.